Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather, or the Sassy Cinderella. Welcome to Technique Tuesdays, part of the Disney decorating series here on my channel. There are going to be lots of fun videos that are Disney inspired cookies, cupcakes, cakes here on this channel, but I wanted you guys to have an outlet to learn the basics too, so that you can dive right into those fun videos. So today we are going to be doing 5 icing techniques that anyone can master. I have everything laid out here for you. I actually have a buttercream that I have purchased. You can make your own or purchase some, either will do. This is what I'm gonna be using today. And then I have this colored icing here. I just want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. I figured, you know, white on white is not gonna be the easiest for you to see. And then I have a variety of tips. First one is number 2D. This is a Wilton tip. There are lots of companies that make tips out there. Then we have number 32, which this is also a Wilton tip. We have number 12, which is a nice rounded tip. We have number 14, and lastly, my beat up old number 3, trusty number 3 that I use all the time. And then I have a variety of icing bags. I actually haven't decided how many I will be using yet, but it's good to have several. You can kind of trade out colors and things like that as you are working. This is a disposable 12-inch bag. There are reusable bags. It's totally up to you. And then I also brought a coupler over here. You will need one per bag. I just grabbed one for now, and then some scissors so we can set our bag up. Lastly, I always recommend that you have a practice board. Always best to try these techniques out, get the feel for them before jumping straight to the cake. So we are gonna dive right in. I'm gonna mix up some color into our icing and we will get started. Okay guys, so I went ahead and I mixed up a bright pink so that you can see, and also this fun bright green color. I did wanna talk briefly about the products I'm using before we go any further. So the buttercream that I have chosen to use is CK brand. I really do like CK products a lot. And for the icing colors, I love Americolor gel paste. They're very concentrated, very user-friendly, and generally speaking, a little bit goes a long way. I will warn you that sometimes if you're using a really, really strong color like a red or a black, it is gonna take a lot of dye to ever get to that color. So there are also powdered colors out there, and when I end up adding that much liquid to my icing, I like to balance it out by using some powdered color and some regular gel paste. You don't have to worry about that too much yet, but just kind of file that away because it is gonna be very helpful down the road, because you will find those colors to be very challenging, especially getting into fondant. So that being said, this buttercream is quite thick, I find, right out of the tub. It's a really good tasting buttercream, but I do like to sometimes add just a pinch of water to my icing colors, because I didn't have to use a really strong color like a red or a black. It stayed a little bit thicker because I didn't have to use much of the color. So I am going to add a little bit of water to this, but be very, very gingered with this. You don't want to go too crazy, or you will have the opposite problem and your icing will be too loose. So I just kind of added a little dribble in there, and I'm going to stir it up. Okay, so you probably saw I got a little overzealous with the water there. If you do have something like an eyedropper, something that's a little easier to control, I would recommend that over a cup. That's just what I had handy. But I just added a little bit more of the buttercream to my mix so that now it's kind of at that nice consistency. I don't know if you can see this, but it looks nice and smooth now, but not too watery, not too runny, and that's kind of what I look for in an icing. And so now what we're gonna do is we are going to talk about properly getting your bag set up for use, and then we will get into the fun part, which is the decorating. All right guys, so the first thing that you're gonna wanna do when you are setting up your icing bag is grab a couple of these couplers. These are going to become your very best friend. Now, a lot of times if someone's new to decorating, a common misconception is to just put the whole coupler into the bag, but you've actually got to remove the ring from the top of this coupler, because this is what is going to adhere our icing tip to the rest of the coupler. So this is actually a separate piece. So you want to start off with the larger part of your coupler. You're going to take your icing bag, open it up, and you're going to drop the coupler as far down into the bag as you can. I'm going to kind of squeeze up on those edges until I find that the coupler cannot go any further into the bag. I always keep the bag pinched right here so that it doesn't shift around while I'm making my cut. And a really easy trick, if you've got a nice pair of scissors that cuts really well, what I like to do is I take my scissors open-ended, and there's going to be this ring on the furthest part of the coupler. So if you start at the bottom of your bag tip and kind of slide your fingers up, your fingernail will just naturally stop under that first groove. And that first groove is where you want to make your cut right underneath it. So I end up taking my scissors, kind of squeezing under that groove at the bottom, and I will just turn the bag into my scissors. And then I will keep my fingers pinched up above as I sort of turn the bag. And eventually it should just pop right off and you are ready to go. And this is also how you are going to prevent, you know, if you cut too high up on the bag, what ends up happening is the pressure that you're putting on the bag puts too much pressure down on the actual coupler itself, and it will pop out and icing goes everywhere. So very important to make sure that you get a proper cut on your bag. I'm gonna give you a close-up so you can see where this cut was made, and then we will move on. All right, so now it is time to put our icing tips on our bags. I set up 2 different bags, one for the pink, one for the green. And I am going to do what I do with all of my students, and we are going to work hardest to easiest. So by the time that you get there, it's going to feel like a breeze. So we are going to go ahead and put one of these number 32 tips on one of the bags. What you're going to do is you are going to find that exposed part of the coupler. You're going to place it over top, and this is where that little ring is going to come in handy. You're going to grab the ring, place it over the icing tip, and sort of find where that groove connects and make sure it clicks down into place and start turning it onto the coupler. You want to make sure there's no wiggling and wobbling going on down here, because that will affect your piping later on. So make sure you've got a good tight connection here and you are ready to go. We will go ahead in this second bag and we will place icing tip number 12 onto the bag. Same thing, take the top of the coupler, the ring there, find the little groove, and when it locks in, go ahead and twist down until you have no wiggling or wobbling going on with your tip. Now, one other thing we do have to do is we are going to be using this massive 2D tip. You will find it very easily that this obviously is not going to fit the same onto this coupler. They do make large couplers, so if you prefer that, you are more than welcome to go buy a large coupler and this will fit onto that. However, I am going to show you the cheater's method because I feel like so much icing gets trapped in the size of that coupler that I can never actually get to when I'm working, and I don't like that. I don't like to feel like I'm having to refill it every 2 seconds. So we're going to do the cheater's method here for this number 2D tip. Okay, so for our third and final bag, our cheater's method, what we are going to do is we are going to take this 2D tip and we are going to treat it like our coupler. That big part of the coupler that we put in, you're going to take the small side of the tip that has the actual pattern on the bottom, and it's going to drop down into your bag, and you're going to squeeze it down into place until it will not go any further. Then I'm going to come up close to the camera and show you what's going to happen next, because you're going to have a really good view on this. Okay, so now you can see the tip has all of these points. I've got the bag flipped upside down here, and I'm going to find the top of one of those points. If I bring my fingernail down just about 1/4 inch above any one of those points, you can take your pick. I'm literally just going to use my nail. You could also use scissors, but I don't like to actually damage my tip by using the metal on metal. So I'm just using my fingernail to kind of make a little marking there so that I know where to cut. Okay, so now that you've made that mark on your bag, what we're going to do is we're actually going to open up the top of the bag again and allow that tip to fall out slightly. And then we're going to look for that marking that we made, and we are going to make a cut right at that marking point. Once you find that marking point, you're going to actually push the tip back up through the bag so that it is exposed through the bottom. And now we know that we've got a nice cutting mark, and it will allow us, again, not to run into that problem where there's too much pressure at the bottom of the bag and the icing's going everywhere. So that is really important that you make sure you don't cut too far. Just a little teeny tiny bit above one of those points is perfect. Next is loading your icing bag. Now, this is something that gets done wrong a lot. Do not overload your icing bag, especially when you're starting out. Even now to this day, I still don't do it because it is so problematic. You end up with icing way up here and you're squeezing and it's coming out all over your hand and it is a hot mess express. And the other problem is, if you think about it like, you know, I'm gonna write a letter to a friend, if I'm holding the bag way up here by the eraser and trying to write this beautiful letter, it's gonna look like doo-doo, right? It's not gonna look good at all. So you wanna have a little bit closer of a hold, again, just like you were writing with a pen or pencil, and you're gonna have a lot more control that way. Start off slow, you can always add more icing. I'm gonna start by opening up the top of this bag and folding the inside out and down a little bit. This is gonna keep the icing off of me. It's gonna make a nice little pocket for my hand. And since I am right-handed and I'm gonna need that hand to scoop my icing, I'm gonna transition here. And I'm gonna take just one nice big scoop, drop it right into the bag, and I'm kind of using my fingers to pull it off of the spoon. I'm gonna fold those edges back up, completely clean as a whistle. And then I'm going to kind of twist the top here and press the icing down towards the bottom of the bag. Once I do that, I like to just twist the top off, fold it over, and set it aside until I'm actually ready to use it. That will keep some air from getting in the top and keep things nice and clean. All right, so one last thing before we get started with our technique here is that this pretty giant 2D tip that we used all by itself is going to be used to make flowers today. So if there is a specific color you have in mind, just, you know, kind of file that away too so that you can fill the icing bag with the color accordingly. Of course, today we are practicing because we always want to practice before putting it on a cake. So not a big deal if you've already picked out a color and it's, you know, green or something like that. That's totally, totally fine. It's still going to be absolutely beautiful. And my kitties are running around the studio today, so if you see little cattails flying by, I apologize in advance. They're very curious as to what Mom is doing in the kitchen today with all of this equipment. So thank you for your patience. We are gonna move on and I am gonna show you these piping techniques. Okay guys, so I'm starting with our tip number 32. And this is going to be a shell border. This is one of the most common borders that you are going to see on every cake ever. Especially if you're at the grocery store, it is like the most commonly used border that you ever see. You can also make this border with royal icing, but you would be using that on fondant as opposed to buttercream. And today we're using buttercream just to show you the technique, but it's exactly the same. So definitely don't be afraid to play around with royal icing as well. Now, I'm gonna start off with my bag. I keep it twisted at the top and I set that twist right in the L crook of my hand. That's gonna keep things nice and stable and the pressure down towards the bottom again so the icing isn't sliding up out of the top of the bag. I keep my fingers wrapped around almost like I'm holding, I don't know, a baseball or something like that. I just keep everything nice and tight right here. A lot of books are going to tell you to hold your bag at about 45 degrees, but I actually prefer mine just slightly higher. That is my personal preference, but again, you feel free to play around with that. I'm gonna start off, I'm gonna keep a nice grip on this board here because mine is a little wonky, it's wanting to move around. And I am going to start my bag slightly higher than 45 degrees. You wanna bring that icing tip as close as you can get to the board without touching. We wanna have just the tiniest bit of space from where we start our squeeze. Now when you start the shell, you're gonna start squeezing, but don't move your hand at all. Let the icing do the work for you. It's filling, it's filling, it's filling. Start coming down to the right and slowly easing off of the pressure a little at a time until there's no pressure left at all, and you're gonna keep the pull going, and that's how you're gonna get that nice, beautiful tail. One more time, now we wanna connect these two shells. Because of the swelling action that happens with the shell naturally, it's going to move slightly to your left anyway. So you don't wanna start right on top of the tail, otherwise it's going to look really crammed together. So leave just a tiny bit of space and we're gonna start all over again. So you're gonna squeeze, 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 let it build, let it build, let it build. Don't move your hand. Now we like the size, start coming down to the right and slowly easing off the pressure a little at a time until there's no pressure left, but I keep that pull going straight and you're gonna have a nice, beautiful shell. You can see my sizing's a little bit off here, but it's kind of hard when you're going really slow. You will find the more you do this, you're gonna get into a really quick pace of making these, and it's gonna make it much easier for you. Let's quickly talk about some of the things that you might encounter. Now, I'm sure you can take a look at my hand here and what do you think is wrong with this picture? I have my bag way too low, right? I've seen many a times where people have their angle way down here and then they just start squeezing and we just get this nice little worm effect happening here. There's no shape to our shell, so you want to avoid the worm. The other one that I see a lot is that people will come in, they'll look great, they're ready to go, and they squeeze, 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 and it's like they get so excited, the icing's coming out, oh my gosh, I'm gonna lift the bag up, look at how beautiful the icing is, oh my gosh, and then they make this giant swell and come down to the side, right? And then we have this crazy little upside down U happening here. One more thing to avoid is that sometimes what people will do is they'll start off, the shell will look great, they'll start coming down to the right, and then they turn the tip in, and you kind of get that dug in effect at the bottom. So you really want to make sure that you keep the pull going in the same direction you've been moving the whole time as you lead the tail off of the back of the shell. All right, so I have now switched to my other bag with the pink, and this is the one that has the coupler in it. It has icing tip number 12 on it right now, which is just a big wide open circle. We're actually going to be using this to make a very similar border. This is going to be exactly the same as the shell, but now it's going to have a smooth effect because it is just a wide open round tip. So same thing we just did, come in really, really close to the board without touching. You're just going to squeeze, 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 let it build, let it build, let it build, let it build, start coming down, 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 slowly easing off the pressure and keeping the pull going straight so that you get that nice tail off the back end. I just cleaned the bottom of my tip off. If you find that icing is kind of collecting in the bottom, don't be afraid to sort of wipe that off and start clean. Now I'm going to leave that little bit of space and start again. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. I like the size. I'm going to start coming down to the right, easing off the pressure and keeping the pull straight. And now we're going to get this smoother border here. All right, guys, so now I have switched to icing tip number 14. This is going to be a star tip. This is going to be a completely different technique. And this tip does come in a variety of sizes. 16 is going to be exactly the same thing, but a little bit larger. And actually a lot of tips are that way. A lot of icing tips are going to just range in size. So definitely, again, feel free to explore that. This is just a very tiny star tip. Now to make a star, you're going to want to actually have your bag straight up and down. I am again coming as close to the board as I can without touching. You're going to squeeze, kind of establish, you need a little bit of size here. And when you like the size of your star, you're going to let off of the pressure completely and then lift up off of the star. If you keep the pressure going as you're lifting, you're going to get a peak on the star. And I do see that a lot as well. It's very easy to do. So just remember, let off the pressure before you have any upward motion. So one more time, I'm going to come in here really close to the board, squeeze, 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 like the size, let go of the pressure, and lift up and off. And you have these tiny, adorable little stars. All right, guys, so now we have moved on to our 2D icing tip, which is the giant tip that we drop straight into the bottom of the bag. Now for this technique, it is basically going to be identical to that of the star. We are going to start with the bag straight up and down to the board and leave just a tiny bit of space. You're going to squeeze, squeeze, squeeze until you get to a nice full size, let go of the pressure, and then gently lift up and away, and you're going to get this lovely little flower. Okay guys, so now we are going to do a slight variation on this flower. For this version, I'm actually going to instruct you to place the tip onto the board. I will warn you that when you actually work on the cake, you will have to have it a little bit above so it doesn't dig into your icing, but this is gonna make it a little bit easier to get the feel for this version because it is a little more complex. So what's gonna happen is you're gonna have the bag straight up and down to your board. You are going to start squeezing a good amount of pressure and start turning the bag a quarter turn. Once you reach a nice flooded petal, you can let off that pressure and lift up and away, and you're gonna get these beautiful flooded petals on your flower. Okay, so I do want to talk to you guys about a couple other things really quick before we sort of finish off and put everything together here. You might run into a couple things while you're practicing or a couple things while you are decorating your cake. First of all, now that we're kind of switching between colors and you're gonna have to go back and forth here, This icing, when it's exposed to the air at the bottom of your tip, might be dry. So if you go back to try a technique again and you find that it doesn't stick to the board right away, it just means that it's been sitting for too long. So squeeze a little bit out and start new with fresh icing at the bottom. The other thing that you will run into is that when you do have to refill your bag finally, there's gonna be a little pocket of air between the old and the new icing. When that happens, you actually wanna go ahead and squeeze what is left from the old icing out, either back into like an icing bowl that you mixed it up in, or into the trash if you don't need it for any reason, I suppose. And you'll hear a little pop that happens, and it's called burping the bag. So if you don't do that, sometimes you might be in the middle of a technique and your design will basically just kind of break apart right there from that air pocket. So make sure that you always burp the bag when you refill your bags. So now what I have done is I actually took the bottom part of the coupler, our little ring, off, and I changed our tip out. We had number 32 on this bag before, and now I have switched to number 3. So all you do is unscrew the ring, take the tip off, choose the new tip, and then screw the ring back over the top. Another thing I did need to mention is that when you are piping and practicing a lot, the heat from your hands will start to warm up and soften the icing. So if at any point that you feel, as though the icing is getting really runny, you can pop it in the fridge for a little while, take a little break. It is natural, it is going to happen. So just a heads up. Now that I have my tip number 3, we are gonna talk a little bit about making lines. Lines are one of those things that I wish someone had talked to me about sooner. I was very self-taught in the beginning, and there are some very simple things that can be said that will make a big difference. So when you are making lines, we're gonna start with a straight line. Matter of fact, we are mostly gonna be doing straight lines today. But when you work making lines, you really have to make sure that your icing is the right consistency. If your buttercream is too dry, your line is going to crack. If it's too runny, it's going to run. It's just not going to look pretty. So you wanna find that nice, even consistency to start off with. The other thing is we're going to come into that 45 to 60 degree angle, kind of like we have been doing with the shell type of borders. And you want to leave a little bit of space between the tip and the board, as we have also been doing. And what makes such a big difference is if you go ahead and squeeze some icing out, lift the bag up a little bit and watch the line fall. Don't try to actually drag the line on your board. Just watch it fall down and direct it where to go, and just touch down at the end. It is so much easier. The other thing that is really helpful is really practice with this and try to figure out where that perfect marriage between speed and pressure is, because you're working out of this teeny tiny little space. So if you're moving too quickly, your line, see, it's just gonna wanna break off and slide around. So you don't wanna move too quickly. Equally though, if you use a lot of pressure and you're moving really slow, your line is going to get all crinkly and funky, which this is okay if you want to, kind of practice making vines and things, but those might be two of the problems you run into. So one more time, that 45 to 60 degree angle, just a bit above the board, squeeze and give it a touching off point, lift above the board and watch the line fall. Nice slow pace and even pressure, and then just tap down at the end of your line. Okay guys, so I have kept with the tip number 3 we were just using for lines, and I made a smaller version of that smooth shell border that we did earlier so that I can show you how we can put things together. So first thing I'm going to do is I've got the bag leaned back slightly towards me. I'm going to start a little squeeze, get some pressure going, and get the line attached and start following the natural line of these smooth shells. Sorry about my cat. And you can see that it creates this really pretty popped effect. The other thing to think about is, again, don't dig the tip into the border. You want to leave a little space so that the line stays nice and full and that you don't get that kind of drug effect through your line. All right guys, so now another thing that we can combine here is, you see we have the green shells that we made earlier, and I am back to the number 14 star tip with our pink icing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some stars in between each of these shells. Straight up and down, straight up and down, It almost reminds me of cactuses, this color here, like a bloomed cactus, but it's really, really cute. And if we had even a third color, you could come in between the pink shells and put little stars there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that even though we are in the same color, but you can see it all works together. All right, guys, so now I still have this star tip. I would typically use a different color than the pink on pink, but you can come to the center of one of those flooded flowers, put a star there, and you've got a center to your flower. It looks really, really great, especially when you have kind of a yellow color like a lot of flowers have. And last but not least, you can come back to that green with the number 3 line tip. You can lean your icing bag back towards you underneath, give it a good little squeeze and kind of taper off into a line and make a stem for your flower. Now, one day we will talk about actual leaf tips. That will be another day. But of course, for the time being, if you're practicing your line work, you can actually draw a little leaf. And you've got this beautiful little flower. Alright guys, so that is it for 5 piping techniques that anyone can master. I really hope this was helpful to you. I absolutely love teaching, and it's really fun to kind of be back in this capacity in a new way. This will not be the last decorating video on this channel by any stretch of the imagination. I actually see it becoming quite a big part of my channel over time. It is something definitely that there have to be kinks worked out for, because there is so much involved, so many little tools, trying to get the right angle so that you guys can get the most out of this content. Of course, if you guys have questions, feel free to always leave me, different ones down in the comments, and I will happily try to answer those for you as best as I can. And I really look forward to doing this again. There will be lots of Technique Tuesdays, there will be Disney decorating, and lots of fun. If you have not already subscribed, I would love for you to join the Sassy family and hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. This is my home base, like I mentioned earlier, so this is my comfort zone, and I really, really love being able to do this for you guys. I will see you in the next video, and have a great rest of the week. Bye!